This podcast contains the personal stories, opinions and experiences of its speakers rather than those of Breast Cancer Now. Welcome to the Breast Cancer Now podcast, providing support and information to anyone affected by breast cancer. I'm Laura Price and I'm the host of the Breast Cancer Now podcast. I'm a food writer and author, and I live with secondary breast cancer. Today we are speaking to the Paralympic champion Erin Kennedy. Erin is a crucial part of Team GB's Paralympic rowing squad and has many accolades to her name, including 3-time world champion and European champion, 2-time World Cup winner and world record holder, and she even has an MBE for services to rowing. Erin is also a breast cancer campaigner, particularly focusing on the importance of early detection. She was diagnosed in 2022 at the age of 29. Amazingly, she continued competing during chemotherapy, winning gold at the 2022 European Championships. She went on to win the 2023 European Championships after a double mastectomy and 15 rounds of chemo. She's now training full-time for the 2024 Paris Games, which are taking place in August and September. Erin, welcome to the Breast Cancer Now podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Firstly, I just wanted to say, wow, I am so honoured to be in the company of such an incredibly accomplished athlete, and I'm in awe of everything you've achieved both before and after your breast cancer diagnosis. So thank you for taking out the time out of your training to be here with us.
No, it's been a long time coming and I'm really pleased to be here.
Good. So we usually start by asking people about their breast cancer diagnosis, but I'm going to switch it up today and ask about your rowing. First of all, you're a coxswain, and I hope I've pronounced that right. For those who don't follow the sport, what does the cox do?
Yeah. Everyone's like, do you have a drum? That's dragon boating. I am the best way to describe it is sort of between a kind of quarterback of American football. So I'm on the field of play. I am doing a lot of strategy, sort of seeing how the game's playing out, kind of leading the field. I have a very close relationship with the coach. I'm a bit like a race desk engineer in F1. I'm getting loads of data and I need to sort of convert hard data into making the boat go faster. And then I am a little bit like a jockey because I am sort of getting a free ride in the boat, steering and basically getting them across the line. So I'm sort of this weird combination between kind of sort of technician, strategist, motivator, and fundamentally it's kind of my job to get the best out of people. You can row without a cox, but it's a bit like going to the gym without a personal trainer. You'll probably work smarter, maybe a bit harder, and most likely a bit better when you've got sort of someone leading you there. And that's me.
Wow, that is a great explanation, and I've never heard any of that before. So is it more mental than it is physical?
Yeah, so kind of on delivery on the day, loads of it is I do loads of psychology work, working with the athletes and trying to get the best out of them, kind of create a cohesive team. But I do all the land training as well. So I train 6 days a week, 2 to 3 sessions a day, partly for weight management because it's a weighted sport for me. So I've got to be under 55 kilos, but also it takes quite a big toll on my body. It's a little bit like Formula One drivers have to be fit. And sometimes you're like, why? You're just driving a car. But kind of the stuff that's going through my body, a lot of it's kind of core work. I do the neck exercises. You'd often see the F1 drivers do as well. And yeah, I need to kind of be fit and healthy in order to kind of be in the boat and do my job. So yeah, I do a lot of cycling and stuff. And I've actually recently started running because before my breast cancer diagnosis, I actually had quite big boobs and running just was a no-go for me. And now I'm like, okay, let's find the silver linings here. Maybe I can run now. And so, yeah, I started running. And yeah, I do a lot of weight training, which I really enjoy, actually. And I think training was a real key part of me sort of keeping that consistency and getting through my treatment. But it also definitely really helped me with like the recovery from a mastectomy, kind of the prehab, rehab, and all those sorts of things. So I definitely think kind of an active lifestyle accidentally ended up helping me when I didn't know I'd needed it.
Yeah, wow. And how did you get into rowing in the first place?
I started at uni. So I went to Oxford, but I'd gone to a state school. I'd never come across rowing. I actually did musical theatre. I was like drama kid at school. And I went to Oxford and I was like, I'll just give rowing a go because everyone does. And you've seen the boat race maybe, around Easter Sunday and looked fun. And I got down to the boat park and I was like, 5'3", and they were like, have you thought about coxing? And I loved it. I just got really into it because I was sort of a jack of all trade, master of none sort of sports person, but I'm unbelievably competitive, love all that side of things. And I was like, here's this kind of really niche sport where like the confidence and I think the kind of language skills and even the stuff you do in drama, like pitch, tone, volume, all those sorts of things can be really utilised in a sporting context. And yeah, I kind of fell in love with it and then got into it at rowing at uni and then never looked back really.
That's very cool because I know a lot of people sort of say, you know, I'm not sporty, I could never do rowing. And I've never thought of rowing as not being, you know, I've never thought of that side, that mental side of rowing, which sounds amazing actually. And it's about communicating and it's about
it's
strategy and so much other stuff.
I think rowing is like I think it's the ultimate team sport because it's the ultimate leveler. Like, I love watching rugby, and I actually particularly like watching rugby when they do like the pan across the front where they're singing the national anthem and then the camera's showing every different sort of shape and size and everything. So I think, you know, rugby, and there are some sports where like it's for every body type and every whatever. Whereas rowing is all about doing exactly the same thing together. And to some extent, you're as strong as your weakest athlete. Like, and so you have to bring everyone together. And it's a very technical sport. And I think it's kind of hard to appreciate unless one day you kind of sit in a rowing boat, because it needs this perfect combo of kind of power. And then it's also kind of, you need quite a lot of resilience. It's a kind of power endurance sport, kind of like swimming is really. And you have to do it together. And as soon as it starts to break down communication-wise, technically, it's a very slow boat, and the boat starts to really pay you back if you kind of get that cohesiveness. And that's what I really love, the kind of psychology side of it, and partly why I train with the team as well as kind of it's good for me is because, you know, I want to be part of the team, and it's good to show up and do it with them.
Before your breast cancer diagnosis, what would you consider to be the biggest career highlight you've had?
Would have been winning the games in Tokyo.
That's the Olympic Games.
Yeah. It was a bizarre, surreal experience because it was during the pandemic. So we had been working towards Tokyo. We come into 2020 and, you know, we start the year thinking we're going to Tokyo. You know, my parents, my husband had booked flights, like everyone was going to come out. And then the pandemic hit, obviously. And within quite a short space of time, the games were postponed. And then all of a sudden, you're sort of hitting factory reset on a year where you've been really building momentum. And that was also assuming that it would be able to go ahead. It was an unbelievable feat to bring people from all nations together, which obviously was such a big risk to actually deliver. And obviously there was no crowds, there's no spectators. We had to bubble before. So I didn't see my husband for about 2.5 months in total. And I've never really thought of the kind of sacrificial element of sport because I actually just think it's a choice. It's a choice I make in the same way as so many other jobs require X, Y, and Z and you spend time away. But it really, to me, I was like, it wasn't about winning to make it worth it. But it did feel that way by the time we crossed the line. There was a lot of relief as well as joy that we'd done it, and it was sort of all worthwhile.
And how did it feel lifting that trophy? How does it feel? Because you've lifted a lot of trophies, knowing that you are the best in the world.
It doesn't grow old, to be honest. It still feels amazing. I think hearing the national anthem play for you and your team is pretty special. Over the subsequent weeks, it sort of made me realise how big it was because we didn't have crowds. We didn't have that. Obviously, we knew people were watching at home, but it didn't really feel real until I got home. And people who I've come across, you know, once in my life, or people I went to school with and I haven't heard from them forever, were like messaging and things like that. And I think it made you realise how much bigger you were, part of something so much bigger than yourself. And rowing is such a funny sport, really. We're just trying to make things go fast from A to B. And in the grand scheme of things, rowing boats don't go that fast. Like, you see, we're working so hard, and then you look at someone just cycling next to us. It's not an efficient mode of travel. And it was really mad how much kind of everyone cared about rowing. And Great Britain are pretty good at rowing. So even the people who've never touched the sport would usually dial in, see that the rowing's on and be like, oh, we're good at this. And then, flick it on. So it was amazing to feel like you were part of something much bigger. And I think that really hit me actually when we went home. And I was like, wow, actually, this is really cool.
Yeah. So moving on to your breast cancer diagnosis. So how and when were you diagnosed?
So the games were postponed to 21. So I took some time off after the games until the January. Just had a nice time, went to saw my friends and family who I hadn't seen for a while and restarted the year training, intending to kind of be building towards Paris. And we went on training camp that May. And I genuinely was fitter and healthier than I'd ever been. Training camp was going well. We're in beautiful Italy, and I was in the shower. As you can imagine, athletes, I think I'm showering, 3 to 4 times a day. And I was checking myself, did kind of a routine sort of check. And I noticed something that I knew I hadn't felt before and wasn't sort of normal. And I'd actually had one lump checked twice before, actually. And it'd been nothing. It was sort of sat right in the middle, the previous lump. And where it sat on my rib cage, it felt quite prominent. And actually, under biopsy and ultrasound, it wasn't as big as it felt. Whereas this lump was kind of here on the top of my breast, not quite as close to my rib cage. So maybe I could feel it a little bit more. And I don't know if anyone else has kind of experienced this when they found a lump or anything like that. When you notice it, it feels like a kidney bean all of a sudden feels like an avocado. Like you can't not see it anymore. And it feels mad that you didn't see it before. Yeah. And almost immediately I got in touch with the team doctor and said, I need to get this lump checked out. And I actually had a really short space of time between coming back from training camp and going off to a World Cup. And I knew that I needed to get it checked before I went to this World Cup. Partly because it would just be living rent-free in my head, and also I wasn't going to be hanging around another couple of weeks. And thankfully I did. And I went and basically had a scan, had a biopsy. And to be honest, I just didn't think it was going to be anything, because you don't, I was 29, really fit and healthy. And I was diagnosed about a week later. And it was actually the day we were supposed to fly out to the World Cup, but I postponed my flight by a day. And it was interesting. A lot of people always say, what was the moment like, when you found out it was cancer? I was pretty sure it was cancer the moment I walked into the room, because I saw a nurse in there. Yeah. And I was like, oh no, you're here for my emotional support. And my poor husband hadn't clocked her and sat down. So he's like looking at the doctor, and I'm like, oh, brace yourself, Sam. This is not going to be good. And so, yeah, I don't really remember loads of the meeting. I remember him sort of drawing on a piece of paper and stuff like that. But yeah, it was that bit was a bit of a blur. And that was why I was so glad Sam was with me, to be honest, because I took in very little.
As an athlete, you must know your body better than most people know their bodies. Did you already know that you could have breast cancer when you were in your 20s, when you were checking regularly?
I was checking partly because there's sort of family history paternally of breast cancer in my family. And my dad's sister had it in her 30s. But I was being relatively proactive. I kind of knew that people had it when they were younger, but it was just sort of part of my routine, really, and generally kind of in the shower and being kind of generally aware. And as I said, I had quite big boobs, and I was also quite aware that it's the bigger the boobs, the harder to find those sorts of things. So maybe you've got to be a little bit more proactive. But I genuinely just didn't think it would be anything. Yeah. But I was doing almost like my due diligence.
When you were diagnosed, obviously a breast cancer diagnosis is devastating for anyone. But when your body is your career, when your career is sport and you use your body so much for that, did you worry that it would affect your career?
Yeah, I genuinely thought it might be the end of my career. And I was also like, for goodness sake, this is the only games in history when we've got 3 years between a game cycle, not 4. Like, I don't have time for this. This is really inconvenient. And I remember him telling me, okay, it is cancer. I was like, right, okay. And then you're instantly kind of thinking like, okay, well, maybe I don't need chemo. so great. That'd be fine. I could do that. And then literally, the next sentence is, and you will be having chemo. And you're like, okay, maybe it won't be long. And you're desperately trying to find like the good in it. And I knew it was an interesting one because I think that mentally I'd been sort of preparing for bad news, even though I do genuinely, I didn't think it was going to be anything, because I moved my flights by a day. I checked with my team and the team management, and I'd said, is it okay if I fly out a day late? And they said, yeah, that's fine if that's what you want to do, but you need to think about, what if this is bad news? Will you be happy to fly out and compete? Should you be doing that? And so I'd sort of had all these hypothetical conversations with myself in a way that I don't think, if I wasn't due to go to the World Cup, that I probably wouldn't have kind of mooted these scenarios. And I sort of thought, you know what, I will want to go, because this could be my last race. It was also, I'd never raced at a World Cup before, and it was the only one that I hadn't won, and I really wanted to add that to the roster. And yeah, I think it ended up being a really positive thing. And also, I knew that if I was diagnosed, how I would want to respond and deal with the diagnosis. And what better way is there to kind of signpost to everyone how you want to be treated by just basically doing it, and everyone's got to keep up. And that's essentially what I did.
And did you go to that World Cup?
Yeah.
And you won that one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
amazing.
Yeah. It was, it was a really weird one. So I got diagnosed, and then I called my mum and dad. My husband called his mum and dad. Then I called my team doctor. I called my coach. And then I was like, okay. So my mum and dad came over for dinner, as did my in-laws. And we basically told them what we knew, which at the time obviously was so little. And I was like, right, I've got a pack, so you need to leave. And, my husband drove me to the airport, and I went to Serbia, and it was really good. I think it was the right thing to do, because, I think one of the hardest times for me wasn't the diagnosis, it was waiting for something to happen, because I didn't feel any illness. I didn't feel unwell. I'd found a lump. And then all of a sudden someone goes, oh, you're not well, actually. And you're like, I'm fine. And I think then kind of deciding to kind of be not myself and sit back and kind of wallow in that for the weekend whilst my teammates were out competing, because they would have had to have replaced me, would have really annoyed me. Like, I would have been twice as grumpy, I think.
Oh my God, scenario. The FOMO.
Oh, it would have been awful. And so I just was like, no, actually, I think the best thing for me to do is compartmentalize this and put it aside, because nothing's going to happen over the weekend. I'm not going to know anymore. And I just need to enjoy this. I'm quite a visual person, and in my head, those kind of subsequent weeks after my diagnosis, I sort of saw it as this sort of Venn diagram of, I had this, my life now and cancer life. And I knew that as time went on, they were going to get merged. And eventually the sort of dominant cancer life, the appointments, the scans, the chemos, the surgeries, everything was going to dominate the life that I knew. And I wanted to enjoy living in this sphere until I knew that I had to kind of let that in, and that's sort of how I saw it. And it's really lovely now being on the other side of it, where those two bubbles have separated quite a lot now, and I dabble into my cancer life every now and then with appointments and all those follow-ups, but I'm very firmly kind of got my feet in the non-cancer life.
Yeah. I think like a lot of people who've never had cancer assume that when you have cancer, you look ill and you seem ill and you act ill and you feel ill. But actually, I was the same as you. I was 29 and I was probably one of the fittest I've ever been in my life. I was diagnosed on the Friday. I'm not an athlete like you by any means, but I was diagnosed on the Friday. And on the Wednesday, I think I did an 8K run. And it was the fastest that I'd ever run in my life. And I felt really strong and fit. And then you have cancer. So you can have breast cancer when you feel amazing and you're really, really super fit. So what treatment did you then have?
Yeah, so I had my diagnosis and then I did fertility preservation as well, which I think often gets glossed over. People don't know, especially for younger people who are going through cancer, is that's all of a sudden something you've got to think about. And I was had a really positive experience, to be honest with you. All the kind of things fell into place and it was successful. And then, you know, the day after fertility preservation surgery to kind of remove the eggs, I went straight into chemo. So I did neoadjuvant chemo, so chemo first because I have triple negative breast cancer. And I had 4 rounds of EC every other week. And then I did 12 weeks of paclitaxel and carboplatin, which basically took me from July to December. So 5 months, basically.
And you kept training, kept working throughout your chemotherapy.
Yeah.
How did that decision come about? Was it just a no-brainer?
Yeah, I think just stopping would have been too much. Like, I always say to, you know, my friends who are athletes who are retiring or anything like that, like, don't change everything at once. And sort of taking my own advice, I was like, I can't just stop and become, you know, a cancer patient. I really hate that sort of expectation of like you said, like when you get ill, you're really fit and healthy, and then all of a sudden they're like, you're unwell, and now you have to, I don't know, like be unwell and stuff like that. And I was like, I don't feel unwell. Like, why should I? And so I just basically made the decision that, okay, I'm going to keep as much normality as I can, you know, keep my feet in that sort of non-cancer life as much as possible, knowing that eventually, like, I will end up having to take a step back. So I carried on competing. I went to the European Championships. I'd had 2 rounds of EC at that point. And it was every other week. So it just happened to be in an off week, which was very convenient. And I think it was just a bit of like bloody mindedness, a little bit of, thankfully, the way that my body responded to the chemo was kind of positive. Like I definitely felt weird, but I wasn't being sick, which was amazing. I'm a very sicky person, so I was really worried about that. And I pretty much was like, all I have capacity for is rowing, sleeping, eating. That's it. Like I didn't kind of dabble in other things. I really kind of shut down my social life. I really was like, this is what I want to do. That was really hard to do. I think high performance sport is like a moving train. It's pretty brutal. Amazing highs, big lows. And I knew that I said about rowing is the ultimate team sport. And sometimes you need to know when you're slowing the team down. And I thought, I can do Euros, I can do this, but like I won't be reliable enough for them and what they need from me for the next couple of months. And actually, I need to look after myself. I still kept training. I was still going in with the team, but I kind of stepped back from the international competition side just to let them kind of process and deal with stuff. Because I think that's another thing with cancer and breast cancer, especially. Everyone knows someone, and it really brings people in, and people are amazing. But you know, it is a big thing on other people, on the support networks that you have, whether that's, you know, your partners, your parents, your teammates, your friends. And to me, it was sort of recognizing that I didn't want their energy kind of going to supporting me to achieve something I really wanted to do, and it compromising kind of what they were working towards as well.
Yeah. You've called it the ultimate team sport multiple times. How did you break the news to your teammates, and how did they take it, and how did they support you through it?
WhatsApp, which is, I mean, they knew I was having an appointment, so it wasn't too big of a shock. But I broke it to my teammates because I was basically getting on the flight the next day to go and enter a competition environment, and I needed them to, I kind of needed stuff from them and they needed stuff from me. So I knew they were waiting to hear the results of my appointment. So I really thought about, okay, how do we both get what we need out of this scenario? And I didn't have the emotional energy to be FaceTiming or anything like that. I needed to kind of be processing. So I wrote them a WhatsApp message, and I basically said, look, this is what I know. Unfortunately, it is breast cancer. This is what I know. I know that we're treating to cure. I will kind of need some big kind of interventions. I didn't say kind of I knew about chemo because I didn't want to freak everyone out, but basically this is what I know. And then I will be coming out. And, you know, the team doctor and my coach know. And then this is what I need from you. And then I basically was like, I don't want hugs. I don't want you to ask if I'm okay. I want to really enjoy the next 5 days doing my job and doing what I love with the people I love. So thanks very much. See you tomorrow. And it was exactly what I needed. Like, everyone just respected my wishes, and it was great. And actually, I wish I could have that clarity now, being on the other side of cancer. And I find the kind of post-cancer bit harder to navigate because I don't know quite what I want. Like, I want to go back to, and I don't even use the word normal, but I want to go back to, you know, a way of life that I kind of, it was familiar to me and stuff, but I don't want to pretend like it never happened. And I wish I could write a WhatsApp message to everyone saying, this is what I want. You know, I want acknowledgement, but I don't want pity. I want this and I don't want that. But I haven't written that because I have no idea how to articulate it. But I think it was probably the best thing I probably did around my diagnosis was just basically laying out the expectations and what I needed from people. Because I think that's one of the hardest things when you get diagnosed is people don't know how to respond to you. And you will have experienced it that people get it wrong maybe more than they get it right with the best of intentions. And it's incredibly hard to articulate to them what's not quite wrong or right or whatever. And I had a really, really good few days at competition. And it was exactly what I needed because I left knowing that if it didn't work out and I didn't do the Euros, that I, you know, was proud of myself and we'd gone and won the World Cup. And if I had to retire and that was the end of my career, I went out on a high and on my own terms.
Why did you say no hugs? Was that, do you think that was you didn't want pity?
Yeah, I didn't want pity and I knew I'd cry. I knew that like the holding of the hug, I think as soon as I was like enveloped in someone's arms, I would be, that compartmentalization would fall down and I'd be struggling. So I kind of, I needed to do the job.
It's like when you have the worst day or the worst week ever and all these different things happen one after the other and you're holding it up and you're holding it up and you're holding it up and then someone says, are you okay? And you're like, no. And
exactly that.
But I fully relate to your digital approach because I did the exact same thing. I remember, and mine was in 2012. So WhatsApp was in its infancy, but I remember telling people via WhatsApp. And then I wrote a blog post that went out to like everyone. I told the sort of inner circle personally. But I never want to have to break that news over the phone because it's just you're then dealing with everyone else's feelings. And if you can do it digitally, then at least people can deal with their feelings and then they can come back to you with, you know, sort of rational and slightly less emotional head on because you as the cancer patient don't need or want to have to deal with everyone else's feelings on top of your own.
Yeah, totally.
It's tough.
Giving everyone the space to deal with it was really key. And I think, you know, obviously you were really young as well when you were diagnosed, and it's the people that you've got your inner circle who probably knew you were having the appointments and things like that, like mine definitely did. And then there was that one that's just half a step out where, you know, you're not going to tell the world that you're going to get a lump checked. And then it's those people and beyond who didn't know you were getting anything checked. So for them, it completely hits them out of nowhere. And I found that, you know, really hard. Like I empathized with them almost. It was really bizarre. And if I'm honest, you know, my husband, kudos to him, because when I went away, I had a good weekend. I don't think he had a great weekend. He called and told a lot of people. So I didn't have to. And then I went and competed. And then we just had a few days on our own in Paris. And I just remember we met up and we did lovely things and ate croissants and drank wine. And I was just like, have you Googled anything? It was like, nope. I was like, nope, no, mate. Okay, good. Like this. And we just were like, we're not Googling. We're not doing this. We're just going to like crack on. We barely talked about kind of me being unwell or anything like that. And it was is what we needed. And so if anyone's kind of listening to this and whether they know someone who's being diagnosed or they've been diagnosed kind of themselves, is like, don't be afraid to go, do you know what, I'm just not going to talk about it today. And don't be afraid to tell people that you don't want to talk about it as well, because, you know, you just crave normality. And sometimes that's just the best thing. I want to be able to answer the how are you question with how's my life going, not how's my treatment going?
Yeah. You also just reminded me of what you said before about how you're in this sort of limbo place at the moment where you're post-cancer and you want to go back to your life, but you also don't want to forget, you don't want to pretend it never happened. And it is hard to know what to tell other people because you don't necessarily know what you need from them, and you do want to move on and you do want to be normal.
Yeah. It's interesting because obviously I do a reasonable amount of media, and journalists are like, almost like, they don't say it as bluntly as this, but it's like, well, you know, is there going to be a point where you're not talking about cancer anymore, sort of thing? And I'm a bit like, no, I don't think so, because it's still a big part of me and my life. And I think actually the best way that anyone who hasn't been impacted by cancer can think about it is like, well, we're not all still talking about the pandemic, but there are hangovers in the way that we live our lives, which were massively impacted by the pandemic. Even if that's just from, a company that you work for was really slow digitally and now has had to like really progress, and now half your meetings are online and you have hybrid working. It doesn't mean you're still talking about the pandemic, but the pandemic impacted your life in a big way. And I think that's sort of how I feel about cancer. And like you say, it's I sort of see it like a sort of, like grief. At one point, you've got like the ball of grief and it's hitting the different sides of the square and it's hitting it all the time and it's so relevant. And now your life is just sort of growing around it. It doesn't mean that the cancer bit's not there anymore, but your life is just kind of full of other things, which is quite nice.
Yeah. Your sport is as much mental as it is physical. What was your mental approach to cancer? I know you talked about sort of just not Googling it and not... Was there an area of just pretending it wasn't there, or...?
I actually think being a sports person helped me so much going through cancer. I always talk about it with rowing as staying in your lane. Like, stay in your lane and focus on the race in front of you. In rowing, all we're trying to do is go from A to B as fast as possible. It's quite simple. And getting distracted about what's going on around you sometimes can be like the biggest thief of joy when you're comparing your experiences of cancer to other people's. And so I think when I was first diagnosed, I was like, okay, well, they've got triple negative and they're having this, and should I have that? And I don't know. Oh my goodness. And actually just understanding that for me, the way my body was going to respond to chemo and what was right for me and surgery options and all those sorts of things, basically stay in your lane. Like, focus on your experiences, your journey, for want of a better word, because on paper you could have two people with exactly the same diagnosis, same X, Y, and Z, and the outcomes can be vastly different. And so I think that was really important. And then I think for me then the other thing was kind of reframing a lot of it. And I think kind of cognitive reframing is one of the best skills that anyone can have, but we do it a lot in sport. And I mean, like, bluntly, it's finding the silver lining and putting context into what's going on in your own experiences. And I think I basically chose to never say, why me? This is unfair. And I think that was a huge part of helping me get through it, basically.
Yeah, I hear you on that one.
Yeah.
You've done a lot of press, and we've touched on this slightly, but you've done a lot of media since your breast cancer diagnosis. Why has it been important to you to talk about your breast cancer? I
think it felt weird to not be sharing it. And I'm not going to lie, like, I didn't have the biggest profile like before. But, there was, people would know who I am in the rowing world, at least, and stuff like that. And it felt like I was hiding it. And I was like, I have nothing to hide. This is not something to be ashamed of. And also I wanted to raise awareness that it can happen to someone when you're fit and healthy. I also wanted to talk about it on social media because I knew I was going to end up having to take a step back, and I didn't want anyone to think that I'd retired or that someone could come and take my seat. I was like, I'm coming back. I kind of talked about it basically about a month after I'd won the World Cup, and it really kind of blew up far more than expected. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And it was lovely, and I really felt like just everyone was on side, and it was really nice. And then I did some press around the Euros, and that's when it kind of went a bit mad. And I just thought, actually, do you know what? I haven't really thought about this, but I just wanted to show that you don't change when you get a diagnosis. Like, others change around you and how they respond. And but I think cancer is such a big weight to bear. It comes with so many preconceptions. I mean, I had them myself going into cancer. And people also don't get checked for a reason. People don't go because they're scared that it might be cancer. And I was sat there going, well, here's someone who potentially might end their career as a result of this diagnosis, who was really fit and healthy. And I still feel like me. I still feel like the same person. And it did happen to me. So I'm going to share it. And then anyone who wants to see, okay, what does it look like to get something checked? And it is the worst possible scenario. Because yes, there's elements when it's really scary, but actually there's elements where it's funny. There's elements where there is joy to be found. You don't lose your identity. And so just as it sort of rolled on, I just sort of gathered these people who were following me and supporting me for all manner of reasons, whether they were interested in rowing and my sporting side of things, or they're interested in what's it actually like to be a young person having chemotherapy. How did you make these decisions and all those sorts of things. And, you know, just tried to kind of show what it's like for a real person actually just to have this. And it's just been a real privilege, to be honest, to be able to use my platform, I hope, to kind of show people that, you know, you don't lose yourself when you get diagnosed. You can still do amazing things when you have a diagnosis, and there is life after cancer as well.
Yeah.
You know, it's rehumanizing cancer because it happens, and how you respond to it and deal with it is kind of your biggest superpower.
And you also talk a lot about early detection, don't you?
Yeah, 100%. Because I just think that it is the best thing that you can do. It's like the best gift you can give yourself. And checking doesn't need to be something that's difficult. And you're not looking for cancer when you're checking yourself. You are looking to know what's normal. So then if something that pops up that isn't normal, you have the confidence to go and get it checked out. And just being aware of the signs and symptoms, I maybe fell into the stereotype of I found a lump. But, you know, it could be anything from kind of inversion of nipples or kind of dimpling that shouldn't be there, kind of puckering, discharge from your nipples, anything that's kind of unexpected. And I think one of the reasons I wanted to really talk about it is that both kind of, you know, breast cancer, but then there's also kind of the other embarrassing cancers maybe that fall into that category, whether that's, you know, bowel cancer, cervical cancer, ovarian cancer, and, you know, obviously more men, the prostate, testicular, all these sorts of things. Like, we should not be prudish about talking about these things. They're just bodies, you know, and being comfortable talking about that in the public sphere, I think the more you talk about it, the more you normalize it, hopefully the more people start checking themselves and can see that it's not a weird thing to do, and it can be just part of your routine, just like brushing your teeth. When it comes to knowing what your normal is, it's normally a touch feel thing rather than a visual thing, even though looking is a really important part of checking. And how often does the average person, you know, feel anyone else's breasts, know what dense breast looks like or feels like versus not, people with smaller boobs, bigger boobs, and all these sorts of things. It is really, really individual. So encouraging people to, you know, you don't need to do it in a public changing room, doing it in the privacy of your own house is just getting to know what normal is for you. And I think it's just so important. And so I'm more than happy to kind of take it on for everyone else and do the embarrassing thing and talk about boobs on national television if that's what I need to do.
For that. And if one of our listeners does find one of those signs or symptoms, what should they do?
I mean, the first thing is go to your GP, and unashamedly go to your GP, get them to feel. And if they, you know, brush you off, especially if you are younger, go to another one or go back again. Like, do not get pushed back. Because if it's something that you know isn't normal, then you push it. You know, don't ever accept that you're too young for X. Like, we are actually increasingly seeing more young women diagnosed with breast cancer. And that might be also because we've got better awareness, so people are catching it earlier, which is fantastic. So basically, don't get turned away, keep pushing, because it's, you know, your peace of mind. And as I said, when I found my lump, as soon as I found it, I couldn't push it out of my brain, and it will live rent-free with you until you get it checked.
Yeah, that's very true. How has breast cancer affected your body image?
I think it's it hasn't negatively impacted my body image, but it has changed it. I think that I kind of, in my head, I was never not going to have a double mastectomy. I have never regretted that decision. But I would say one of the challenging things is dressing myself, actually. I don't know, maybe I was in a bit of a rut, but you walk into a shop and you're like, I like this suits me, I shall buy it. And not being able to just walk into a shop and pick stuff up has been like both confusing / liberating / irritating, because I'm now sort of left with half a wardrobe that I don't really like anymore, but weirdly don't want to get rid of yet. And just sort of figuring all that out has been interesting. Yeah. I found it really frustrating trying to lift weights in the gym. I used to be able to like bash out pull-ups and things like that. Every now and then I just go and hang off a bar and I'm like, nope, still feels weird. Like I don't feel confident in my upper body to like lift weights and stuff like I used to. I'm getting there, but you know, the way that my reconstruction happened, because I had implant reconstruction, is, you know, it fundamentally your chest has been reconstructed. That's where the word comes from. And, you know, your pec's been moved. The way that the different kind of chains are working don't feel normal. And I've kind of found that quite frustrating. The big plus I have found is bras are very much cheaper than they used to be. And I've tried to kind of lean in. Summer clothes, I feel I'm getting there with like, oh, this is nice, a little top, and I can wear these sorts of things. Winter clothes I'm still working on, but it's definitely been more of a learning curve than I expected, actually.
I have not had a mastectomy at all, but I had my sternum bone, my entire sternum bone removed last year and replaced with a synthetic one, and had the latissimus dorsi taken off my back and put onto my chest to help my body accept it. Wow. So my chest now looks different. Like my bone, my clavicle kind of sticks out, and there's less flesh on my chest, and it's all very weird. And that's just over a year ago. And I have felt those changes, that weirdness, how things feel differently. I had to get back to swimming and just not being able to swim at all initially, and then slowly getting into doing front crawl, getting to the point where I can do front crawl as well as I could do before I had the operation and stuff. And it is all possible, but it does all feel weird. And I can't imagine when that sport is your job, how different that must be as well. But have you, like, how has keeping up the training and the competing throughout your diagnosis and your treatment been in terms of helping you get better?
I think it was huge. Like, I think one of the hardest things potentially in that initial bit was when you have the diagnosis until you maybe start the treatment, is that kind of, I'm lost. I don't know where I'm going. What does my future look like? Because I spend so much time knowing, I mean, if you said, Erin, what are you doing on the 7th of June? I could literally be like, blah, 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 blah. I'll be here, maybe in the country, maybe not. I'll probably have these sessions, this and this. And all of a sudden not having that structure was really hard. So kind of having the structure was fantastic, because it kind of gave me goals. And then when that was taken away, I really struggled with that, which was one of the reasons I was like, I'm going to keep going into training and I'm going to keep competing and knowing what I was working towards. But the mental challenge, I think the biggest one for me, was finishing chemo and then waiting for my double mastectomy. So I finished chemo 8th of December and I was having the double mastectomy 26th of Jan. Because the double mastectomy was a huge milestone, which was full of uncontrollables. There's no regular chemo. There's no end date. You're going to be better now. You can go back to rowing. And, you know, there's a lot of risk in a double mastectomy and having a double reconstruction as well. You know, the surgery was 8 hours. How are you going to come out of it? Will it have gone well? I was also waiting to see if my lymph nodes had been impacted or not. Thankfully, they hadn't. But, you know, am I going to have them all removed? There's a 1 in 10 get a kind of an infection. If you do get an infection, you might have to lose the implants. There's all these sorts of things. And it was that uncontrollable that I actually really struggled with more than the chemo itself, because I was like, I don't know how this is going to play out. This is where the sports person of me came in again. And I spoke to my surgeon and I was like, I'd like to prehab. What can I do? And she was like, well, there's no official NHS prehab, but I guess, I mean, I'm going to be working in and around your pecs and your shoulders. And so what can you do to make my job easier? And so for anyone who is potentially undergoing a single or double mastectomy, if you want to sort of get your body as well as you can, is basically stretching out your pecs as much as you can. So it's kind of all kind of pushing the shoulders back, sort of working on your lats, working on your abs, because you'll need your abs to help you get up and around, because you won't be able to pull yourself up onto things. That's more kind of on the other side of things. But then, yeah, as much as you can stretch out your pecs. And it's as simple as like, you know, hand against the wall and pushing and stretching out that area, because the looser your pecs are, the easier it's going to be to kind of get in there and reconstruct and hopefully, you know, make it easier on the other side. I think that's also me just trying to control the controllables, you know, how can I help myself the most? And so I just was like, I'm going to be the best patient ever. And I think even whether it helped or didn't help, I'm never going to know. But mentally, it made me feel better. And so, and yeah, I did like my rehab every day just to try and desperately get back to competition.
That's a great tip. And how are you getting on with your training for the Summer 2024 Paralympics?
Yeah, going really well, really well. So, I got back into the boat in May 23. And it was mad because I basically went and competed at the European Championships in Lake Bled in Slovenia. I'd never raced there. Oh my gosh, isn't it amazing? Yeah. And they only have rowing regattas there kind of every kind of 8 to 10 years. And so I know that I'll probably never race there again in my career. So like, what a place to kind of come back. And it was a year to the day I was diagnosed that the competition started, which if you wrote that in a book, that would sound far-fetched. And, you know, I just imagined being there. And then I was there and it was amazing. And so that was kind of a really, really big milestone in like, I'm back. This is good. So since then, we raced that summer and qualified for the games. And we've been in a really heavy winter block recently, which has been quite a big toll on my body. I then had kind of a second part of my reconstruction in October. So that sort of early season, October to December, was sort of coming back from that second part of my reconstruction, because I had expander implants swapped for more permanent implants. But, you know, I'm looking at 2024 with no surgeries, no chemo, and just getting ready for the summer, which is really exciting.
The Olympics has always been so intertwined with my cancer life. And there's been so many things that you've mentioned in this interview about that made me think that there's so many parallels between sports and cancer, because you talked about your 15 cycles and reaching the end of those, and it's like the final straight. And I remember coming to the end of my chemo and thinking of cancer as like a marathon, and you're reaching the finish line and you've got all these different hurdles to overcome. Yeah, there's so many sports analogies. But when I had my chemo, it was during the Olympics of 2012. And I can't remember if it was I think it was my first session. Yeah. It was the Brownlee brothers triathlon, right? Yeah. And I'm from Yorkshire and they're from Yorkshire. And Yorkshire smashed it in the 2012 Olympics. And I remember sitting in the chemotherapy unit at the Christie in Manchester and watching the Brownlee brothers cross the finish line as the final drips of the chemo went into my veins, and my mum and dad were both there. And I still, whenever I see the Brownlee brothers on TV, it brings tears to my eyes, especially that time when a few years later, I think in Mexico or somewhere, one of them carried the other one over the finish line. And it's just, I don't know, sport is just a great analogy with breast cancer.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think like it's that you're nearly done and then when you finish. And I think there's also that kind of life after cancer thing. I can see it in athletes as well, because there's that bit where like you sort of, you know, ideally win the medal and you know, and you have that, and then you're like, whoa, like that was a lot. And you're then like dealing with like the aftermath, which has like massive highs, but also, you know, like a lot of people who then generally at games, people tend to kind of retire afterwards or whatever. And then they're like, now what? You know, this has been it's such an identity thing as well. And this is how do I move on from that and everything. Yeah, definitely. There's so many overlaps.
Yeah, I think it can all take a long time to process as well.
Yeah, definitely.
You need time for that. So there's a lovely quote on your website that I'd like to read out, which is, "I didn't want breast cancer to define me, but ironically it has more than anything else in my life. The difference is I have written the narrative." What does it mean to you to write the narrative? And is that something we can do with any adversity in life?
Yeah, 100%. I think that being the main character of your own story is the most important thing. And it was for me. It was one of the reasons that I decided to use my platform and speak out about breast cancer. It's one of the reasons that I'm still talking about it now. And I hope I never stop talking about it, to be honest, because I think that I just didn't want to be typecast as this or that or the other. And I think it's the worst way to meet some amazing people. And I think that there are so many people who have so many stories and are doing such amazing work that it would be such a shame not to be able to kind of like, you know, share what they do and share the importance of, you know, what it's like to be someone with cancer and how then you can help others kind of support those people, or whether you have breast cancer yourself. It's there's no one way to do things. And I think that, you know, I've said it before, but like I think cancer is can be such a burden to the person that has it in a way that other big diseases maybe don't have that kind of rep and come with these kind of expectations or preconceptions or anything like that. And I think for me, kind of writing the narrative of this is how I want to do it. I was really interesting when I was diagnosed. My team doctor has been amazing. She's actually Steve Redgrave's wife, Anne, and she's been kind of my link with rowing and then my oncology team and really kind of supporting me through it. And she's been the team doctor for, I don't want to say the wrong number here, but over 20 years. And she sees all these athletes come through the GB rowing team. We're a big team. It's kind of at any time 70 athletes sort of in the training centre. She's like, we've never had anyone with cancer before. An athlete having cancer whilst competing. But she was like, but we will again at some point. And actually, there's always a first. And for me, I was the first in rowing, but I won't be the last. And so if I can go, okay, well, this is how I'm going to do it, then that sort of paves the way, I hope, for the next people. I think like a rising tide lifts all the boats. And so, you know, if you can use your platform and keep talking about it, I think that's definitely for me. And that's that kind of writing the narrative was a really big part of me and my mental state and getting through it.
Okay. I'd like to end with the question we ask everyone on this podcast, which is, if you could change one thing in terms of breast cancer diagnosis, treatment and beyond, what would it be?
Oh, that's a big question. I think it would be to kind of empower patients to have the confidence to advocate for themselves, to be able to ask questions without time limits, to explore the options that are best for them with healthcare professionals that aren't stretched and have the capacity to listen to them and hopefully act on what they want. And that goes all the way through from early diagnosis through to choice over surgery and things like that. And I think that, yeah, kind of encouraging individuals that, you know, you can advocate for your own health and knowing that could be kind of received well as well.
So if someone is listening to this podcast and they have friends perhaps who don't check themselves or do check themselves and have found something, what would you say to them?
So, yeah, I think that everyone should be checking, regardless of kind of age, size of breasts, and I think it should just be something that just becomes part of their routine. And sort of if you're listening to this and you know that people aren't checking, it's directing them to kind of the right resources to help them to understand what the signs and symptoms are, and to encourage them if they do find anything that's not normal, just to go to the GP, because early detection really, really can sort of save lives. And so the more we talk about it, the more we encourage it, the better it is. You're not looking for cancer, you're looking to know what's normal. then you know what isn't normal and you can go and get it checked.
We'll put a link in the show notes to the Breast Cancer Now website with the signs and symptoms. We also have a podcast episode with Dr. Liz O'Riordan where she talks about some of the terminology that you've used on this podcast, which is talking about triple negative and what that is, and also talking about the grades and stages, which can be very confusing terminology. So she explains all that in one of our episodes. Erin, where can people find you or follow you if they'd like to get to know you better?
I'd love for people to follow me. I talk about all sorts of things from breast cancer through to rowing and everything in between, a bit of baking if you like that as well. So I'm mostly active on Instagram. So you can find me by searching Erin Kennedy, or I think my handle is Erin MWJ because my maiden name. Or I am on X as Erin Vysotsky. But yeah, I'd love for you to follow me. And I'm also really open to kind of DMs and asking questions because I spoke to quite a few people when I was first diagnosed through the wonderful community on Instagram. So if anyone kind of wants to ask some questions that maybe I haven't answered, there's literally nothing off limits to me because the more I think we talk about it, the more normal it becomes. So yeah. Drop me a message.
That is very generous of you. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and thank you so much for taking time out of your training to be with us here today. Thank you, Erin.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Breast Cancer Now podcast, make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please also leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts and perhaps recommend it to someone you think would find it helpful. The more people we can reach, the more we can get Breast Cancer Now's vital resources to those who need them. You can find support and information on our website, breastcancernow.org, and you can follow Breast Cancer Now on social media at Breast Cancer Now. All the links mentioned in this episode are listed in the show notes in your podcast app. Thank you for listening to the Breast Cancer Now podcast.